Story number 1. Disturbing secrets in plain sight. It was a quiet night in our suburban neighborhood, and we were settling in for the night. As we closed the garage door to take a quick smoke break, we heard muffled voices coming from next door. Curious, we listened closely as we smoked and were shocked to hear our neighbor confessing to a gruesome murder. We heard all the details of the crime, and as the story unfolded, we realized the victim was a young woman who had recently gone missing and was on the news. Suddenly, we realized we were in grave danger, living next to a murderer. We sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. We knew we needed to call the police, but we also didn't want to alert our neighbors that we had overheard their confession. We quickly formulated a plan and decided we needed to call the police. As we crept out of the house to try to spy on them, we saw the neighbor's garage door cracked open. When we looked in the crack, we saw power tools you would use to cut wood on a table with several black garbage sacks. There was also a black 50-gallon barrel in the corner covered with a blanket, and a roll of plastic on the ground next to the table, and what looked like rope under the plastic. We really had an uneasy feeling about the sight we just witnessed. We had heard enough horror stories to know that this scene was not normal. The power tools and garbage bags looked too clean, too new, and the black barrel, hidden away in the corner, seemed too suspicious. We couldn't ignore what we had seen and heard. Once the police arrived at the garage, they immediately secured the area and began to search the premises. It didn't take long for them to find the black barrel in the corner of the garage that we saw earlier. It was clear that something sinister was indeed inside. After carefully removing the blanket covering the barrel, the police officers opened it up and were horrified to find a body inside. It was clear that this was no accident. This was a murder. The police began questioning the neighbor, who was the only other person who had access to the garage. He initially denied any involvement in the murder, but when the police presented the evidence they had found, including the power tools and the roll of plastic, he broke down and confessed. The police wouldn't tell us if the body they found was the girl on the news or not, but the fact that they found a body was chilling enough. We all wondered who the victim was and how long they had been there. In the days that followed, we learned more about the investigation. It turned out that it was indeed the girl that was reported missing on the news. The incident left a lasting impression on us, and we never looked at our neighborhood the same way again. It was a sobering reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of being vigilant and aware of our surroundings. After the incident, we moved far away from the neighborhood and now live in the country with no neighbors. Story number 2. The abandoned cabin. A terrifying discovery in the heart of the woods. The sun was setting as a group of hikers made their way through the dense woods, their backpacks filled with provisions and camping gear. They had been hiking for hours, following a trail that was supposed to lead them to a nearby campsite, but they had gotten lost somewhere along the way. As the light began to fade, one of the hikers spotted a cabin in the distance. It looked old and abandoned, but they decided to investigate, hoping that they could find some shelter for the night. As they approached the cabin, they noticed that the door was ajar. They cautiously pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and musty, with cobwebs clinging to the walls. There was a table in the center of the room, surrounded by 4 chairs. On the table was a dusty deck of cards and a flickering candle and a note. The note read, "Welcome to my humble cabin. You have stumbled upon my trap, and there is no escape. I have been waiting for you for a long time, and now that you are here, I will have my fun. Enjoy your stay." The hikers shuddered in fear as they read the note. They knew that they were in grave danger, and they had to come up with a plan to escape quickly. The hikers looked around the cabin, trying to find a way out, but every time they tried to move, they triggered another trap. The floorboards creaked, the walls shifted, and hidden spikes emerged from the ground. As the traps kept getting triggered, the hikers began to panic. They had to find a way out before it was too late. But how could they escape from a trap that was designed to keep them inside? Suddenly, one of the hikers noticed something strange about the deck of cards on the table. There was a pattern to the way the cards were arranged, and it looked like it might be a clue. They studied the cards carefully and realized that each card had a number on it. The numbers seemed to be arranged in a specific order, almost like a combination. The hikers quickly worked out the combination and tried it on the lock of the door. As the hikers turned the lock, they heard a loud clicking sound, followed by a hissing noise. Suddenly, a cloud of poisonous gas filled the room, making it almost impossible to breathe. The hikers stumbled backward, gasping for air, and tried to find a way out. But the gas was too thick, and it was starting to affect their senses. They felt dizzy and disoriented, and they could barely see through the fog. As the hikers coughed and tried to regain their breath, they realized that one of their group members was now missing. They frantically searched the cabin as the fog cleared, calling out their friend's name, but there was no response. The cabin was empty, and there was no sign of their missing friend. The hikers knew that they couldn't leave without finding their friend, but they also knew that they couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. As the hikers searched the cabin, they noticed something strange about the deck of cards on the table. The numbers on the cards seemed to have changed, rearranged in a new order. They quickly realized that the combination they had used earlier was no longer valid. They were stuck in the cabin with no way out, and now one of their friends was missing. The hikers knew that they had to think of a new plan, and fast. They huddled together, trying to come up with a way to escape the cabin and find their missing friend. One of the people noticed a loose board under the rug with a combo lock on it. The hikers quickly gathered around the loose board and examined the combo lock. It was similar to the one on the cabin's door, but this time they had to be more careful. They remembered the deadly trap from earlier and decided to try a different approach. One of the hikers suggested using the deck of cards as a guide, since they seemed to be connected to the locks in some way. They looked at the numbers on the cards and tried to match them to the numbers on the combo lock. After several attempts, they finally found the correct combination and heard a satisfying click as the lock opened. The hikers lifted the loose board and found a narrow tunnel underneath. It was just big enough for them to crawl through, so they quickly descended into the darkness, not knowing what's to come. The tunnel was long and winding, and the hikers could barely see in the dim light, but they pushed on, hoping that it would lead them to safety. After what seemed like hours, the tunnel finally opened up into a small cavern. Suddenly, the ground beneath them started to shake, and the hikers knew that something was terribly wrong. They scrambled towards the hole as fast as they could, but it was too late. The tunnel collapsed behind them, trapping them in the cavern with no way out. The hikers were now stuck, with no food or water, and no hope of rescue. As they sat in the darkness, their fear grew with each passing moment. They could hear strange noises coming from the walls of the cavern, and they were certain that something was lurking in the shadows. Their missing friend was still nowhere to be found, and they feared the worst. Days passed, and the hikers were growing weaker and weaker. They knew that they had to find a way out soon, or they would perish in the darkness. Just when they had given up all hope, they noticed a small hole in the ceiling of the cavern. It was their only chance. The hikers worked together to climb up to the hole, using whatever they could find as makeshift tools. Finally, they managed to squeeze through the opening and emerged into the bright sunlight outside. They were exhausted and traumatized, but they were alive. They looked around, trying to get their bearings, and then they saw something that made their blood run cold. Standing in front of them was the man who had lured them into the cabin. He was smiling, and he had a look in his eyes that sent chills down their spines. "You thought you could escape my trap," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But you were wrong. You belong to me now." The man approached the hikers slowly, relishing in their fear. He had planned this moment for a long time, and he was not going to let them go easily. He leaned in close to them and whispered, "You are all mine now. You will do as I say, or suffer the consequences." The hikers were terrified, but they knew that they had to stay strong if they were going to survive. They tried to think of a way to escape, but the man had thought of everything. The cabin was surrounded by traps and obstacles, and there was no way out. The hikers knew that they needed to come up with a plan quickly. They decided to try to reason with the man and find out what he wanted from them. "What do you want from us?" one of the hikers asked, trying to keep their voice steady. The man laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "What do I want? I want to see you suffer. I want to watch you squirm as you try to escape my traps. I want to break you, to make you mine forever." The hikers realized that there was no reasoning with the man, and that they were in grave danger. They needed to come up with a plan to escape before it was too late. They tried to gather their strength and come up with a plan, but they were weak from hunger and dehydration. The hikers' hearts skipped a beat as they heard the sound of barking dogs in the distance. Could it be rescue teams coming to save them? Or was it just the man's own dogs, trained to hunt down anyone who tried to escape? The sound of the possible search dogs grew louder and louder, and the man's face twisted into a look of panic. He knew that he had not accounted for search dogs in his plan, and he quickly tried to think of a way to escape. But it was too late. The man tried to run, but he was quickly caught by the search team. He was a notorious criminal who had been on the run for years. The hikers were rescued and taken to safety, grateful to have survived their ordeal. As the search team inspected the cabin and disarmed all the traps, they discovered a secret door behind a refrigerator that led to a sound padded room which contained the missing hiker tied up with a bottle of water and some bread. Who knows what would have happened to the hiker if the search dogs didn't find them? As the hikers recovered from their traumatic experience, they couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the search dogs had not found them. They knew that they had been lucky to escape with their lives. Eventually, the hikers were able to move on from their nightmare in the cabin, but they never forgot the lessons they had learned. They knew to always be careful when exploring the great outdoors and to never underestimate the dangers that could be lurking in the wilderness. As for the man who had lured them into the cabin, he was finally brought to justice and locked up for his crimes. The hikers found some solace in knowing that he would never be able to hurt anyone else again. The hikers were hailed as heroes for surviving the man's trap and helping to bring him to justice. They went on to tell their story to anyone who would listen, warning others to be cautious when going into the wilderness. And although they never forgot the terror they experienced in that cabin, they were grateful for the lessons they learned and the friendships that they formed during their ordeal.